We're back to the Total Education Spotlight Show on the Total Education Network. Again, TotalTutor.net for more information. Twitter, Total Tutor, Neil S. Haley, Facebook. And it's the Super Bowl series. Excited as can be. We've had some really good conversations. Norm Johnson gave us our prediction. We heard from Russell Okung on this show, again, about his great foundation. And also Chrissy Carew talking about a Seattle Seahawk that's doing great things in the community. So now I want to welcome the program from sportsbanks.net, Paul Banks. Paul, thanks for calling, and I'm looking forward to finding out your prediction on the Super Bowl and see if we both agree on this. Thanks again for calling.
Oh, well, thanks for having me.
I'm excited to talk to you, especially I'm a huge Bronco fan. My two favorite teams are Pittsburgh, and that's our flagship stations in Pittsburgh. My two favorite teams are the Steelers and Broncos, and anytime they play in the AFC Championship is the greatest thing in the world. But it's been some years since the Broncos have been back in the Super Bowl, and as you and I know in history, Paul, the Broncos have kind of been like the Vikings, never really winning except those 2 years back to back. They have not really fared well in the Super Bowl.
Yes, they got off to a very rough start in their Super Bowl history. The low point came with that 55-10 drubbing in 1990 at the hands of the 49ers, in which the Broncos were considered, like you said, the AFC version of the Vikings. But then Elway did win a couple, and they've really established themselves as one of the more premier franchises. And I have to admit, I got a little bit of a soft spot in my heart for the Denver Broncos. I played football in high school for a team that had a horse mascot and wore blue and orange, so it's just kind of natural for me to be cheering for them on Sunday.
So what was your favorite team growing up, Paul? Who did you like the best when you were a kid?
The Bears, being from Chicago. Loved Walter Payton. I remember Super Bowl 20 was just the biggest thing that ever happened to this city in the history of sports, pretty much.
Yeah, definitely, and it was kind of funny. I was talking to Steve Nelson today of the New England Patriots, and he talked about that drubbing of the 1986, which probably was one of your favorite games of all time, right? The Super Bowl shuffle and everything with the Bears.
Oh, yeah, I still remember, like, in first grade, getting the Super Bowl shuffle and RPM for the Christmas grab bag, and it was, like, the most exciting thing. Sweetness, Jim McMahon, the refrigerator, Richard Dent, all those guys. They still, even when the day comes when the Bears win their next Super Bowl, it will still not overshadow that team. That team will still rule.
Definitely, and I'm hoping someday to have Jim McMahon on. I'm crossing my fingers. At one point, I'm friends with a couple of the Bears. I've had a couple of Bears on. They're not significant like a McMahon, and so I'm hoping someday to have him on to talk to him because that was one of my favorite teams of all time as well. Okay, so let's go to the breakdown. Another thing I try to tell listeners, and we have not heard this, Paul, and it seems like you're a historian just like myself, and I'm a historian in education, but sports is like my junk. I get excited. Think about the rivalry between the Broncos and Seahawks when they were both in the AFC West. People don't, I didn't really hear a lot of mention of that this week. Have you?
No, I'm surprised by that. In fact, the only time I've ever seen reference to, like Kurt Warner, John Elway I was watching the 30 for 30 on the quarterback draft class of '83, and both Warner and Elway went in that class. People aren't bringing up those battles in the division and the rivalry they had because we've had other storylines that have kind of this Super Bowl has not really had controversy. There's been really no storyline which really has a lot of deeper meaning. So instead, they've picked about 4 or 5 storylines and ran with them all week. And I'm curious to see if you've kind of noticed the same thing that I did.
Yeah, they have. And it goes back to some stupidity of the Seattle Seahawks. And I think that the other storylines are just about just the Seahawks. I don't think people want, except in the Manning storyline, I don't think anyone wants the Broncos to win. I think that the darlings are the Seahawks, and that really frustrates me for sure.
Yeah, the only storyline that relates to the Broncos is how many times is Peyton Manning going to be asked about his own legacy? Because, there's this idea that this could be his last game. And, of course, Manning has too much class. He would never say that this would be his last game because then the whole Super Bowl week would be all about him. So we'll see if it is or not. The rest has just been Seahawks. How come Marshawn Lynch doesn't talk?
Oh, that's ridiculous. Yeah. And honestly, I know you're not going to say anything, Paul, because I'm sure you get to have the opportunity to talk to some of these guys. But Marshawn really shouldn't have said a word because, honestly, he needs some help in public speaking for sure. He's probably the first ever running back in the NFL that's going to be on this stage that literally I don't think is presenting himself well at all. And they're saying, oh, he shouldn't talk, but no. You are representing the NFL, in my opinion, Paul, and that means that and the NFL has all this money. They got to teach, and this is something that's entertainment business. You got to figure out some way to talk to the people, right?
Yeah, you would think so, given that he went to Cal Berkeley, which is a great school, and he played 3 years there.
Yeah, it's like he's just playing, I think, more of a thuggish thing, and I know people wouldn't say that. So that's one of the storylines. And Richard Sherman, oh, come on now. This is the most ridiculous thing in the world that they had to try to figure out something to make it, and then Richard Sherman thinks he's the greatest. Now he's asked every question, and what is your take on this whole Richard Sherman thing?
Well, I was actually more offended by the video I've seen of Richard Sherman since, because now he's become every cliche, every platitude. I'm just like, wow, is he boring? I mean, what a waste of time he is. I'm like, the one person we had who, yeah, okay, that could be offensive. Sure, he was cocky. Sure, that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, but at least he actually said something. And then the other side of it is it just got so out of hand with the way we talk. I mean, it's just a post-game interview. It's just the fact that we were consumed by this for 2 weeks is just ridiculous.
Right, consumed and more than consumed, Paul, just absolutely. And that's the big storyline. And now let's break down the game because I think that's what you're here for. But again, this is what, in the entertainment side, I look at things. But now the two teams go together. Here's my take. Here's my, amateur take on predictions. As people, if you listen to any of my other shows, they just rip me apart for sports predictions. But here's the reason. The Broncos' defense has improved greatly in the last couple weeks. They have really changed the style of play of their defense. And Seattle's offense is really not done as well. And you're looking at almost a rookie quarterback that's really never dominated a game at all. The Broncos can stop the running game. So right off the bat, Seattle's in a little trouble to begin with because their offense could not go 3 and out real quickly. Do you agree with me on that, Paul?
I would have to agree with you that Russell Wilson is not a superstar. I covered him in college very closely when he was at Wisconsin, and as great as the numbers he put up in college, I never thought he would amount to anything in the NFL. He's really surprised me. He's really come very far in what he's developed into beyond my expectations, but I don't see him as if he wins, he'll go down in history with your Trent Dilfers or your Jim McMahons or your Jeff Hostettlers as the game managers. He cannot win it by himself. He's not that special.
No, he isn't. So this would go back to a quarterback like him, Trent Dilfer, winning the Super Bowl, as I think you just brought up. But here's the difference. I don't see the Seahawks as having the defense that the Baltimore Ravens had, if you're looking at one of the lame duck quarterbacks that won the Super Bowl.
Well, the Seahawks do have the number one defense in the NFL, but no, they are not up there with the 2001 Ravens. They are not up there with the 85 Bears. They are a special group, but only by the standards of today. They're not that dominant. And as talented as the Seahawks are, I think Denver just has too many weapons on offense. I think their passing game and how Peyton can spread it around is going to be too much for Seattle to overcome.
Exactly. Think about that, and that's a great point which you brought up. The Broncos used to score in 2 seconds, and then that made the weaknesses of the Denver Broncos defense. But if you saw how they dissected the last two teams that they played, or how they, especially, what have they done, Paul? They have literally just little short passes, controlled the clock, and then didn't allow the other team to be on the field. And it kind of just debilitated the last two teams they played. Right,
and that's exactly what the NFL's version of the running game is today. That's why you're not going to see tailbacks go in the first round of the draft anymore, and running game and running backs are interchangeable. You win by that short passing game, chewing up the clock, keep moving the chains. That's how the NFL wants you to pass, whether it's long or short. And the Broncos have a very very versatile pass game that can go vertical and keep it short. So, if they get a lead early, they'll be able to kind of grind the Seahawks down that way.
I just think the Seahawks is the Broncos of the 80s. And I brought that up to Norm Johnson. I said, I see you guys as the Broncos of the 80s. I don't see anything special yet. I think that you need to have a couple more pieces of the puzzle to become Super Bowl champions, and you're not dominant. And the Ravens' defense was dominant. The year that the Ravens got to the Super Bowl, you see the talent difference. And the way John Fox coaches, he's coached in a Super Bowl, and even though we know how great the Seahawks coach is, the situation is it's the first Super Bowl for him. That's different. They choke. Experience means something in a Super Bowl, doesn't it?
That's true, but I wonder what happened to Bill Belichick, because he seems to have been out-coached and lost his experience. But aside from him, I'd say that is definitely the rule.
That's because Belichick cheated for 3 Super Bowls. Don't even get. I as a Steeler fan, don't even get started on that one. So I'll go with that. The Belichick didn't have the talent. That's why he didn't win. And I just believe Denver has so much more talent. And if they stop Marshawn Lynch, the game's over. Because if you want Russell Wilson to beat you, he's not going to. Right? I don't see Russell Wilson beating the Broncos.
No, I don't either. And I think the guy who's going to really win this game for Denver is going to be Demaryius Thomas. I think, Richard Sherman's a great corner, but, he, as he famously said himself about Crabtree, that's not a great receiver, but Demaryius Thomas is. And I think Thomas is going to own that matchup on Sunday night.
The only thing we can go against that, all our predictions, is the cold weather. Peyton's record in cold weather games. What is that record? You have that number, I'm sure, Paul, right?
Not off the top of my head, but I mean, he was a dome quarterback pretty much all his life.
So I don't know, under certain degrees, his record. That'll be an interesting one that I'm sure you'll end up on a show before the Super Bowl to talk about. But that's the thing that everyone's talking about: Peyton Manning in the cold weather. And see, I just think that the inexperience of Russell Wilson, the inexperience of Richard Sherman, the inexperience of that team for a Super Bowl, and the amount of talent the Broncos have. The only way the Broncos lose is if Manning's off, and that there's a lot of turnovers. If the Broncos don't turn over the ball, they win. That's the bottom line. Or special teams gets involved. Do you see a close game, Paul, or do you see a blowout?
I see a really close game. This is the first time we've had the 2 number 1 seeds meet in, I believe, the early 80s. If they go back that far, we've seen so many upsets in the NFL playoffs. When you get 2 excellent teams like this, and Denver and Seattle were favorites back in August. They were kind of the favorites back in the preseason, and it's easy to understand why, because there's so much talent. So I do think it will be close, and I'm going to say Broncos 27, Seahawks 24.
Well, I'm going to say Broncos are going to destroy them, because if there's going to be a win, the Broncos are going to wipe the floor, but the way they're doing it is they're not going to score 52 points, because they've learned that they'll lose. They can even lose to the Dallas Cowboys doing that. So I see a score of the same dominance of like 28-10, 35-14, where really the Broncos are controlling the clock, scoring, and Peyton Manning starts to look at he's one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. And my prediction is he'll come back for one more season, and Elway's already telling him. And Elway's a competitor, Paul. I'm sure Elway's talking in Peyton's ear right now. Hey, I brought you here for this reason. I got rid of Tebow for you to do this. You take care of it now. That he's going to win back-to-back Super Bowls, so Elway now is one of those superstars that now can be considered not just great as a football player, but as a football mind. Do you agree with me on that? If this happens, if we could see back-to-back Super Bowl championships with Peyton Manning and the Denver Broncos, that Elway finally will be considered a pretty good mind in pro football.
Yeah, I would have to say it would verify. The best analogy I can think of is Michael Jordan, legendary as a player, complete failure as an owner with the Bobcats. And Elway wants to obviously stay away from that type of legacy. It would have been easy to stick with Tebow. It was just Tebow mania, and everybody got caught up in it. And he did the unthinkable. He pried Peyton away from the Colts, who were ready to restart. But I'm sure maybe the Colts may have second thoughts about what they did right now. with Peyton, he's got a great life planned out for him after football. He's from the first football family. He's got all the connections you can think of. He can walk away and do whatever he wants. So if he wants to stay, then that's a testament to Elway's ability to convince him to stay, because we know Peyton's has had some, well, we know he's had some health issues, so we know that's always at risk. So if he's willing to risk all that to win one more, assuming he wins Sunday, which we both think he will, that truly does say something about the powers of persuasion that Mr. Elway has.
No, trust me. Here's the reason why, Paul. And I'm going to give you the reason why. He's as competitive as he was as a kid with his brother. His brother has 2 Super Bowls. He wants more Super Bowls. Trust me, that's the Manning family. And I see it from the stories. He would love to go out that he has more Super Bowl trophies than his brother. And he believes if he can knock out these 2, we don't see Eli winning another Super Bowl with the way the Giants are. So that's my take in all this. But where can we find information on you, Paul? I really appreciate your analysis and things like that so that our listeners out there can check out all the cool things that you do.
Thank you. Thesportsbank.net. A lot of people make the mistake of thesportsbank.com, but it is thesportsbank.net is where I publish all my articles. Lots of NFL, lots of football, of course, right now. On Twitter, at Paul M. Banks, all one word, no spaces, no underscores, at Paul M. Banks. That's where I tweet my random thoughts and publish links to all my articles.
So do you go out, Paul, and cover different events? Where do you do your primary coverage? Are you more about the kind of just writing articles? Or do you go to the events a lot, or are you?
Oh, yeah. I've done a lot. I do a lot of college basketball. I cover a lot of college basketball, the NCAA tournaments. I recently covered the Cubs convention here in Chicago, as well as the unionizing effort with Northwestern. I was at that press conference, the move to have the first union in college football. So that's a story I've really been focused on.
All right, well, cool. It sounds good. Definitely look forward to having you back on the show to kind of provide those sports knowledge and kind of a back and forth. And you now are got somebody that's putting out some real big predictions. But you see, Paul, at least that's not my expertise. So if I'm completely wrong, but again, I'm bleeding blue and orange right now, and I will be crying in my beer or whatever I'm crying in if the Broncos lose and the Seahawks win, because now I'll have egg on my face. Especially when you get to listen to the entire show and listen to my interview with Norm Johnson, you'll say, "Oh my gosh, you definitely have egg on your face." But hopefully, we'll be happy when we made the right prediction that the Broncos win. So thanks again for calling.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people predict the Broncos, but you're the first one who's really made that bold blowout prediction. So kudos to you. I expect you to definitely do some bragging on Twitter or something if you're right. You should.
Well, I should, and it's just because I watch both teams, and I think the AFC is a much more talented division league than the NFC. That's my opinion. But good talking to you, Paul, and best of luck, and we'll definitely have you back. Okay.
Thanks. Sounds good.
All right, take care. You're listening to the Total Education Spotlight Show on the Total Education Network, and we'll be back in just a moment.